All right, for our weekly meeting, we're going to talk about the last two chapters of the book. Chapter 14 is on punishment and sentencing. And we've talked before about the different rules in different states, but judges do have a fair amount of latitude, discretion in how they operate the sentencing thing. And therefore, there's a lot of differences, what are called disparities. So sentencing disparities exist basically when people who committed similar crimes are given different sentences. And lots of offenders in the United States are sentenced to prison. That's a controversial issue about why so many. But again, there's all sorts of reasons why that may be true. So the main topic of this chapter is the purposes of punishment. You need to have some good notes on that. So basically, when we look at the crime control model of criminal justice, that has been the biggest influence over the past 40 years on police, prosecutors, and a lot of judges. Basically, it interprets it the primary aim of law enforcement as the apprehension and punishment of criminals. The idea is we're trying to keep them from repeating their offenses and keeping others from doing the same sort of crime. Basically, the different viewpoints are a reflection of the different purposes of punishment. Psychologists have identified at least 7 different goals for punishment. The first is just general deterrence. Okay, just if we punish people, then hopefully they won't commit crimes. The second one is individual deterrence. We're hoping that particular individual will not commit another crime. Third was incapacitation. If they're locked up in prison, then they can't very well be doing crimes outside of prison. The fourth one is retribution. Basically, they deserve to be punished. The fifth is moral outrage, that society gets some sort of a release of their feelings against criminals by seeing them punished. And then, of course, rehabilitation. Hopefully the person will go through the punishment process and come out a better person. And then restitution in some form, in some way, maybe they can make amends for what they've done. So a lot of these goals are what are called utilitarian goals. They're trying to accomplish some particular outcome, such as compensating the victim, preventing crime, or rehabilitation. Rehabilitation has been in and out of favor throughout history. When it was a dominant goal, criminal sentences were expected to accomplish something other than just incarceration punishment. However, high recidivism rates indicate they're not very effective. Recidivism is a person comes out of prison, do they commit another crime? But after nearly 40 years of getting tough, there is no reduction in recidivism. And so we began to look back towards rehabilitation. It has to do with what are called retributive processes, retributive approaches. And two of the punishment goals we talked about are retributive. Basically, retributive means we look back at the offense and determine what the criminal deserves, what's their retribution for what they did. The notion of retribution is that the punishment should be proportional, should fit the crime. Basically, as a general rule, the public prefers deterrence and retribution. We want the criminals not to repeat their crime or not to do the crimes in the first place, and we want them to pay back. So why is that? Basically, a lot of it is sometimes we don't really know exactly why we believe what we believe. We also have what are called restorative approaches. And more recently, basically attempts are trying to address the damage that's actually caused by the criminal offenses. Obviously, if a criminal kills somebody, there's no way of restoring that. So restorative justice views crime as a violation of the victim and the community, therefore, rather than the state. It's not against the state. And so as the book says, it uses open dialogue to get consensus about what to do. The goals are to repair the harm that's been done, restore the losses that have been caused, and then get the offenders back into society so they can be a productive member of society. And also help victims to feel empowered and not so feeling so much like a victim. Obviously, judicial discretion makes a difference in sentencing. That's a judicial function, but Congress and state legislatures have a lot to say about what's done in terms of sentencing. The legislators basically can limit judges' discretion, and some legislators believe judges should have little or no discretion. They emphasize retribution and argue the punishment should fit the crime. Mandatory sentences, sentencing guidelines, the abolition of parole, all of those are part of this get tough idea. Other legislatures want the sentence to fit the defender, and therefore they want the judges to have discretion. So that varies. Some states have what are called indeterminate sentencing schemes, The judges basically are free to exercise their discretion, and then a parole board determines actually when the person is released. And there's been opponents and fans of that particular system. In other states, the legislative branch has created a system of determinate sentencing, a cookbook sort of thing, that basically significantly reduces a judge's discretion, and offenders are given a fixed length of time determined by statutes and guidelines, and there is no parole. Also, some states in trying to reduce discretion have come up with mandatory minimum sentences for certain offenses, including drug crimes. Current federal sentencing policy is based on the Sentencing Reform Act of 1984, which basically abolished parole and established a sentencing commission to develop mandatory sentencing guidelines. So how does sentencing take place? Well, in most courts, there's several parts of the sentencing process. The judge receives a file that gives information about the offender's personal history, their prior convictions, if any, and then a number of documents describing various procedures like formal arraignment dates and stuff like that. The judge reviews the file before the sentencing hearing. At the hearing, recommendations are presented first by the prosecutor and then by the defense attorney. Statements are arranged in this order so the defendant has the final word before the judge makes a decision. In fact, and though the defendant speaks last, data indicates that the prosecutor's request for a lengthy sentence can be very, very influential. All right, so what about determinants of sentencing? Well, page 336 talks about the focal concerns theory that says judges focus on three main concerns when they're trying to decide what they're going to do sentencing-wise. First is the defendant's culpability. How guilty, how responsible was the person for what they did? Second is protection of the community, and that has to do with incapacitation and deterrence. And the third one is practical constraints about the sentence, things like family situations, ties to children, things like that. That brings us to a special area of sentencing juvenile offenders, and I'll stop and say hi, Colton. So we're on page 337 talking about sentencing juvenile offenders. I got your paper, I just haven't got a chance to read it yet. So the juvenile system is different from the adult system in several ways. First, obviously, not all juveniles are arrested. That's not all the reason they get into the system. They can be brought there for other purposes. Most young people whose cases are adjudicated in juvenile courts are found to be delinquent, and then they go from, hi, Elma.
Hi, sorry. I was trying to get onto my hotspot.
Okay. And we're on page 337. Anyway, so basically the dispensational phase is the sentencing phase. The goals of juvenile dispositions are kind of different. Obviously, we're trying to ensure public safety. That's always a goal. We're also looking at the needs of the young people. And basically, they reflect the options that the judge has reflects that. Obviously, a juvenile can be committed to a secure facility. They can be given probation. I've run into lots of kids in my teaching time who are on probation. They talk about their PO, and it can be a lot of supervision there. They can be referred to a group home that exists around here too, or other lower security type of residential placement. They can go to a day treatment or a mental health program. Or they can just be fined, given community service. You see a lot of community service or restitution, all those things fit. Juveniles who fit whatever the criteria is in the state, varies from state to state, are transferred to adult criminal court, may be sentenced under what are called blended sentencing statutes that basically combine the options from juvenile court with the options normally addressed in adult criminal court. Juveniles who commit very serious crimes like sexual assault, attempted murder, and murder are much more likely to end up in adult court and end up with an adult type of punishment. Page 338, next section talks about sentencing sex offenders. People kind of approach that differently. Most people believe, I mean, a person might rob a 7-Eleven, you think, well, they might not do it again. But most people believe that if a person is a sex offender, that's more of a nature of who they are. And so sex offenders are much more likely to reoffend, and therefore different types of punishment, other types of offenders. Data doesn't really back that up, though. You know, that's really true. Convicted sex offenders are generally required to register with local law enforcement officers after they've been released from prison. And you can get online and find out if you have sex offenders living in your neighborhood. And then if they move, they're supposed to notify people of their move. Okay. Page 341 talks about involuntary commitment. And that's basically has to do with the mental health facilities. And sometimes a person can be sentenced to prison. Then once their prison term is done, then they now are committed to a mental health institution. Then they talk about mandated treatments for sex offenders on page 342. As opposed to other types of crimes, sex offenders are generally required to go through some type of treatment supposed to cure them of their antisocial tendencies. If they go to prison, then they are involved in some type of offender treatment programs. If they don't do that, if they don't participate as they're supposed to, then parole is not going to happen. And then offenders, of course, require probation. Who do require probation generally have to attend some sort of counseling sessions, maybe group sessions or whatever. Some of these have been successful, and there are some treatment programs that reduce the offender's sex drive. The pharmacological approach, sometimes called chemical castration, involves administering hormones to reduce testosterone levels, which then should reduce sex drive, sexual arousal, and sexual fantasy. Therapists have also used something called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, to reduce deviant sexual behavior. Of course, that's based on the assumption that it is sex drive, why sex crimes are committed. We know that not all sex crimes are sexual in nature. Some are just violent and have other reasons why they do that. All right, last section in the chapter is on the death penalty, which is obviously the ultimate punishment. The federal government still has a death penalty. As of last year, there were still 31 states. That kind of varies from time to time that had the death penalty. But again, very controversial, very heated discussions in our country. Historically, most people favor capital punishment. And so this judicial system has reflected that, but that's kind of going away. States passed statutes that basically indicate how capital crime is to be treated and what juries are involved in. Okay? First off, legislators make only certain crimes eligible for the death penalty. That changed. When I was a teenager, a long time ago, 60 years ago, in North Carolina, there were 4 crimes that were death penalty, which at that time was electric chair. And that was murder, of course, first-degree murder, first-degree burglary, that's burglary of an inhabited place, and first-degree arson, setting fire to places inhabited, and rape. They were all capital crimes. Of course, now things have kind of changed. But so it's decided by the state. The state decides what is a capital crime. If the defendant is charged with one of those, then there's 2 phases to the trial. The jury decides the guilt or innocence of the defendant in the first phase. That's called the guilt phase. If the defendant is found guilty, then there's a second phase, the sentencing phase. And in that phase, other factors are held. It's almost like rediscussed again. There are some concerns about innocence. There's an estimate somewhere around 2% of those sentenced to death may actually be innocent. That's a hard one to nail down. We do know for a fact that that does happen. While Ed Koch was mayor of New York City, he said that the death penalty affirms life. By failing to execute murders, then we're saying that killing people is not such a bad thing, and that lessens the value of a victim's life. That's one of the arguments in favor of the death penalty. But most arguments for the death penalty are about the eye for an eye thing, and therefore there's no way to really prove or disprove that. But one of the testable things is, will it act as a deterrent? And basically that doesn't seem to be true. One of the reasons for that is because, as we know, most crimes are murders of crimes of passion. They're not thought out things where they go out and intentionally have somebody killed, like our infamous Lubbock case with our friendly doctors from Amarillo trying to kill people. So social scientists don't find any indication that it really affects the rate of crimes of violence. Again, there's very few intentional type murders. It's really most about people who are angry, upset, or whatever, and they commit the crime. So that's kind of a questionable issue there. All right, so there have been some limitations to the use of death penalty. Obviously, if the person is intellectually disabled, that throws some questions in there. All right, that brings us to chapter 15, juvenile and adult corrections. Okay, page 354. Basically, so we're going to look at the process, what happens after a person's convicted of a criminal offense. So this is going to include adjudication of delinquency and criminal conviction. So adjudication of delinquency is what happens with juveniles, criminal conviction, obviously adults. There's more emphasis now on diversion and reentry. What happens when the person comes back, halfway houses, things like that, like with drugs. There are two considerations that have to do with juvenile forensic assessment. One is public safety, and the other is trying to treat the person. Hopefully it's a young person that can be saved. The community-based interventions, lots of those exist out there. Lots of controversy about that. Basically, we won't really talk about that much. Bounce over to page 369, talk about institutional interventions. Basically, you hear the people use the term jail, use prison. You guys know, I'm sure there's differences between a jail and a prison. Basically, they both are secure places where people can be incarcerated. Jail is usually a community-based facility like a county jail, and that's basically housing people who are there for a short term, like a couple weeks or weekend or something, whatever. And then those who've been charged for a crime and haven't been convicted yet. And so they're intended to be temporary, okay? People who've done relatively minor offenses or just people awaiting trial. Typically, if the sentence is less than a year, jail is where they end up. A prison is part of a usually state-operated correctional system or federal. Basically, states have different institutions for that. In Texas, we have a Department of Corrections that handles the prisons, and then the Federal Bureau of Prisons is part of the Department of Justice. They handle federal prisons. Basically, if you're in a prison, that means you've been convicted of a criminal offense, okay? And basically, longer than a year, generally speaking, is why people are in prison, okay? All right, jump over to page 374. Talk about psychological consequences of imprisonment. Basically, that's pretty involved. It depends on the person a lot. Obviously, if it's a minimum security federal prison, it's well run. They have programming, treatment, TV, all that good stuff. That's different effects than somebody who's in a crowded, overcrowded, mismanaged facility that's really about punishment and excessive surveillance. And obviously, we live in a time now with the whole coronavirus thing has thrown a whole different aspect of that as well, too. Obviously, there's very few studies on what takes place in prison. For inmates, their reports are that initially things are pretty tough, but over time they gradually adjust the environment, and that's what's called prisonization, the taking on in or greater or less degrees of basically what it means to be a prisoner. All right, that finishes the book. We will meet next week to talk about the test. Okay, so I guess you guys have both. Anyway, your papers are not due till next week, and but earlier is fine. And so next week should be fairly short. We'll just talk about maybe kind of a quick review again of the test and talk about exactly how the test is going to work. All right, anybody got anything?
You said something, a paper was due next week. What paper is that?
The one you turned in today. Did you?
It's due next week.
Yeah. Did you read what I wrote on that?
No, I haven't looked at it. I had just gone on the computer and I was trying to get online with you.
All right. Well, you need to re-look at that and revisit that. Okay.
So I got to redo it again.
Well, it's supposed to be a current event article.
Oh, and I forgot to get that. Okay.
Yeah.
I will redo it.
You just did kind of a report or something, whatever. So.
I did a report over the chapter of the one we were.
Yeah. You did like notes sort of thing. Yeah.
So
but it's not due to next week. Yeah, that's why I said in the email.
Okay.
You got the next week. You can resubmit it. So.
Okay, I'll resubmit it.
Okay, and Colton sent his in too. So I got both of yours. So,
Awesome.
and also I got Raven sent hers in too. So.
Okay, so if I can get something that is
normal
similar
current,
to an article.
Yeah, normal current event article with it. Yeah. So,
Right.
all right. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Anything else, Alma, Colton? Anything?
Nope.
All right. So, want us to remind you about evaluations. Of course, this is going to be a weird term to evaluate, right? And hope it's going to change. I got a feeling this summer's going to start off similar, but hopefully
Okay.
not. But, oh, and the registration started today, right?
Yes, I was gonna ask you. I'm gonna try to take that class that you're teaching.
Yeah,
Do
the
you think?
Thursday class. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna end up online or?
I don't. That's what I just said. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know anybody knows what's going to happen.
Oh, okay.
If we need to, we'll adjust accordingly. But I mean, I have an idea what we do. Basically, it's kind of a tough class to do online because it really, like this one, is supposed to be about discussion, supposed to be about people talking about family stuff. But we can do what we have to do, right?
Yes, sir.
So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. That starts what the Thursday after Memorial Day, right?
I don't remember. It's 20 something,
Yeah.
25th or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's weird. This Memorial Day is early this year.
I don't even know what today is.
Today's
These
the
days are
27th.
crazy.
Yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen. So
Okay.
so we'll just we'll play it by ear. So we'll see what happens. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good. I'm glad you're taking it. Okay. Should be
Yes.
fun. Colton, you got your classes rolling?
Do what?
I said you got your schedule rolling, or?
Oh, not yet. No, sir.
Well, it's just the first day. So yeah, I have no idea, guys, what's going to happen this summer. Nobody knows what's going to happen, right? You hear all sorts of different things about when we're going to roll back and do things different. But I assume we'll go in the conservative direction, I imagine, around here. I know the governor already said, we finished out the year without going back to school. That's going to be weird, So, all right. Anything else? All right. Good night, guys. See you next Monday for a very short session. Okay.
Okay.
All
Bye-bye.
right, bye. Bye.